And welcome to the Skeptical Leftist Podcast, the show where I talk to a variety of people to spread critical thinking, progressive politics, and left-wing philosophy. And today I'm joined by Cory Doctorow. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I always like to talk to a Cory, especially one with the good sense to leave off the superfluous E.
Yeah, I never understood why there was an E in some of those.
It's fancy. It's just needless fanciness. It's it's rococo. It's like the gold leaf that Trump is sticking up around the Oval Office. It's needless ornament. Yeah,
for sure. So I imagine that most of the people who will be watching this already know who you are. But I guess if you want to give us a little bit of background just in case.
Sure. Well, like you, I'm a Canadian. And like you, I am named Cory. I don't know if we have other things in common. I'm from Toronto. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a writer and an activist and a journalist. I've published more than 30 books. They run the gamut from picture books, middle grades, graphic novels, young adult novels, science fiction novels for adults, crime thrillers, books about tech policy, short story collections, essay collections. I'm a blogger and have been for about as long as blogging has existed. I was one of the founding co-editors of Boing Boing and wrote that for 19 years. And these days I have a blog called pluralistic.net. And for the last 24 years, I've worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an American nonprofit that works on digital human rights. And I was formerly their European director. I'm a former Torontonian, a former Londoner, and now a Los Angelino.
Okay.
And I have become a citizen of all three countries. So
wow,
that's me.
That's quite a bit. Especially the citizenship in three different countries. That's pretty.
I'm working on Polish.
Oh, is that right?
My grandfather was a refugee. So if we can find his papers, they're pretty forgiving about giving you Polish citizenship if you can show that your ancestor left not under their own power. And then that would get me back into the EU, which would be very nice. My British passport used to be a lot more interesting before Farage.
I bet. Yeah. My partner, she went to university in Belgium. So she always talks about like how easy it is to travel between countries and how much culture there really is there and how interesting it all is. So
yeah, if you don't like mayonnaise on your fries, you can be in a different country in like 5 minutes. It's like you're not trapped with Belgian food. You can go anywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Especially since Belgium is about the size of like Winnipeg.
Right. That's crazy. That's so crazy. Yeah, we've got a lot of elbow room here in the prairies for sure. But I guess the main point of having you on, I guess, is you've got a new book that is coming out or just came out.
Comes out on October the 7th. I don't know when your episode will drop, but so it used to be that like especially if it was a big title, there would be no final copies in circulation until the day and date. And since the pandemic, everyone's been like, that's just not as important as we thought it was. So I've now done 4 signings at which they had copies of the book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It is not out, but you can in fact show up at a place where I am, and there will be a bookseller with several boxes of them who will sell them to you, and I can make them non-returnable with a pen. Wow,
that's interesting. I guess I never think about hard copy so much anymore because everything's digital, but and so I guess the book Enshitification, in a sense, the word has been around now for a little while, so we all kind of have a sense of what Enshitification is, but what do you mean when you're writing about it in the book?
Yeah, so, as I said, I've worked for Electronic Frontier Foundation, worked on digital rights for most of my adult life now, getting into a quarter of a century. And those are like really complicated, abstract, technical ideas. And they do become quite concrete and immediate for people, but usually not until something really terrible has happened to them. And, it's a bit like the climate emergency. It'd be really nice if people cared about it before their house was on fire.
Yeah.
Because maybe we could stop the house from burning down. So, I've spent my whole life trying to come up with different ways to talk about this stuff that tries to convey the urgency without, eliding the nuance, making sure that I'm not just, devolving into clickbait. And a few years ago, I came up with this dumb, sweary word, enshitification, to refer to something that is quite complicated And that turned out to be like a kind of magic combination. People come for the minor license to profanity and they stay for the longer analysis. And I'm going to try not to like dump it all right now at the start of this conversation, because then that'll be just me going for 20 minutes. But broadly, enshitification is an observation about what's happened to digital platforms, that they follow this characteristic decay pattern where first they're good to their end users. They find a way to lock those end users in as they take the bait. Once the end users are locked in, they can be abused without risking their imminent departure because there's something that it would cost them to go. And so the platforms make things worse for those end users in order to make things better for business customers, who also get lured in and then also locked in. That's a big departure, I think, from other theoretical frameworks. You may have heard things like, oh, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. It's very like kind of, I think of it as like a bougie consumerist way of thinking about things, like, oh, well, it's like a reward card for Tim Hortons, that if you spend money, then they treat you right. And in fact, one of the things that the enshitification hypothesis notices is that they treat everyone really badly.
Even if you're spending money.
Even if you're spending money. Like, it's not that like Facebook loves advertisers and hates you. Facebook hates advertisers. Procter and Gamble, right? Noted socialist agitators. In like 2018, they had been spending $200 million American dollars per year on surveillance ads. They call them behavioral ads, but they're ads that watch you, follow you around, and then figure out what to advertise to you. And they zeroed that out, and they saw a $0 drop in sales because, like, to a first approximation, all those ads were not being shown to anyone. It was like $200 million a year going down the fraud hole.
Right.
So the platform is first good to end users, lures them in, locks them in, brings in business customers, lures them in, locks them in, and then it makes things worse for those business customers too. And the ultimate kind of equilibrium that platform bosses are seeking to attain is one in which all the value, except for like the mingiest kind of homeopathic residue needed to keep people locked to the platform and business customers locked to those people, all of that value is harvested for its executives and its shareholders. But beyond this, enshitification is like an inquiry into why this is happening now. Obviously, like, greed isn't new. The ability of digital platforms to kind of fiddle the rules and do a fast bait and switch, that's not new either. It's not like there's new people running some of these companies. I mean, it's just been Mark Zuckerberg all along. So what changed, right? What happened about, over the last 10 years that made, on the one hand, platforms all start to decay at once, and on the other hand, to do so without us being able to depart, right? Why are so many of us still on, say, Twitter, or still using Amazon? And that's where I think the meat of enshitification is. Enshitification is, at its root, a theory about the constraints that prevent firms from abusing us and what happened to them, right? And it hypothesizes 4 kinds of constraint, things that stop platforms from turning on us. One was competition. That's the discipline of the market. The next was regulation, the discipline of the state. The third was labor, the discipline of your workers. And of course, a lot of tech workers, they're pretty Tron-pilled, right? They fight for the user. They want to make sure that when they miss their mother's funeral to ship some product on time, that it's not then enshitified to make an extra nickel, right?
Right.
And then finally, there's this like unique, really interesting characteristic of digital technology, something called interoperability, which is where you can always make one technology work with another technology. And the one everyone's familiar with is ad blockers.
Right.
51% of web users have installed an ad blocker. It's the largest consumer boycott in human history.
I've got 3 on mine right now.
Good man, right? And you can imagine, if you're like planning the next iteration of the website, you're in the product planning meeting, and the person running the meeting says, right, we make the ads 20% more obnoxious and invasive. We get 2% more top line ad revenue. And someone who doesn't care at all about users might stick their hand up and say, Elon, I love how you think. But has it occurred to you, you make the ads 20% more obnoxious, 40% of our users are going to install an ad blocker. We'll never see a dime from them, right? That no one's going to uninstall the ad blocker. And so the book traces the forces that caused all of these constraints to go away. The decision not to enforce anti-monopoly law that produced these cartels in every sector, but especially in digital. There's a New Zealand software developer who says, I'm old enough to remember when the internet wasn't 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4,
Yeah.
right? And how a sector that grows that concentrated finds it much easier to capture its regulators. I mean, think of like Bell and Telus and Rogers just ganging up on the CRTC.
Right.
How workers unwisely failed to capitalize on their scarcity to unionize. They sort of figured, oh, well, because we're so valuable, because we're scarce, we don't need a union, not realizing that eventually the scarcity would be blown up by supply meeting demand. And then, we know what Jeff Bezos does to workers that he can replace easily. They work at Amazon warehouses. They're injured at 3 times the rate of other workers in similar sectors, and they pee in bottles. Yeah. So, you had that moment, right? But you didn't take advantage of it. And then finally, we've had the monotonic expansion of IP law over 20 years that has made it possible for firms to block interoperability. And maybe we can talk about this in a bit. The Canadian story of how that law came about is particularly disgusting. And it involves a member of parliament who was also a minister who sent pictures of his penis to what he thought was a young woman, but turned out to be 2 blackmailers from Cote d'Ivoire. So it's a pretty spicy story too.
Jeez. I don't think I know that story. So.
Well,
no, that's it'll be.
I guess Tony Clement was never your MP.
I know the name Tony Clement.
Disgraced sex pest Tony Clement. That's his epitaph. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's something that I learned about but then forgot because there's so many of these things.
I mean, when we're talking about Stephen Harper ministers, like that barely scratches the surface, right? Yeah, he was doing retail misogyny. Like most of them are doing it wholesale. So
yeah, that's right.
It's nice to see it done with the personal touch, though. It's really artisanal. Yeah. Maybe he did it like in a leather apron.
Right. Yeah, he had the hands-on touch.
That's right. Yeah. In this age of mass production and impersonal, everything's digital, everything's the same. Tony Clement will take an individual picture of his penis and send it to you.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a mass-produced one. Or AI generated.
Yeah, really. I mean, come on. What are our conservative ministers going to do in an age of ubiquitous image gen when the market is filled with AI penises? Who are they going to send pictures of their dicks to?
Yeah, that's right. There won't be any draw for it.
That's right. That's right. So, we'll need to have like Amish communities or Mennonite communities that revive the ancient traditions. Keep them alive. Tony Clement can join us sex past neo Mennonites.
That's right. Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. I wonder, do Americans know what Mennonites are?
Because they got them in Pennsylvania, but also they have Old Order, right? They have Amish, which Canadians have too, right?
That's right.
But there's lots of different kinds of Old Order people in America.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I was thinking while you're talking about Facebook, like I used to joke because like they always said that the algorithm would give you the ads like that were supposed to be meant for you. And I would I would share screenshots and be like, well, who is this for? Because it sure as hell isn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this is why like we had this panic a couple of years ago that maybe Mark Zuckerberg had invented a mind control ray. And that's why your Grampy was a QAnon now. Right. And, it came out with things like the social network and in the age of surveillance capitalism. There's a great scholar at Virginia Tech, Lee Vinsel, who calls that stuff crita hype. It's when you repeat the claims that firms make in their marketing as criticism and therefore help them make the marketing claim. Right. So Mark Zuckerberg, like the reason he was running around telling people he had a mind control ray is that's how you sell advertising.
Right.
And so when people from Facebook would go out on a sales call and say, well, why should we pay an extra 40% for advertising on Facebook? The salesman would say, well, I'm glad you asked. I think as you'll find out from my critics that my boss, Mark Zuckerberg, has finally done what like Rasputin, Mesmer, MK Ultra, pickup artists, and the neurolinguistic programming movement could never do. We have built the mind control ray and we can sell anything to anyone, right? So that's why you should buy our ads. I think that there's like this much more parsimonious and I think importantly, if you're a leftist, materialist explanation for this, which is that they just had a monopoly.
Right.
They just had a monopoly, right? Yeah. And a lot of the tricks that they do are just crude tricks that were easy to spot when they were done by humans, but you do them with machines and they're done so quickly
Yeah.
that it's very hard to spot. So I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a wonderful video of Penn and Teller doing the cup and balls, and they do it slowly with clear cups. So you can actually watch the ball get hidden and taken away and dropped and
I
put
have
back in.
not seen that.
So
Yeah.
it's an amazing video. And what you figure out is that this is not a sophisticated trick, right? It's just done smoothly.
Right.
And, in the age of enshitification, you have a lot of per user, per session alteration of the rules. So, for example, nurses increasingly are booked as contract nurses. This is the way hospitals do union avoidance. So they understaff and then they book contract nurses by the week or by the day. And those nurses used to be given shifts by staffing agencies that were pretty local, right? You might have 2 or 3 in your town. Now there's 4 that are nationwide, and they're apps. They all call themselves Uber for nursing, of course. And the Uber for nursing apps, because the U.S. has had no new consumer privacy law since 1988. The last consumer privacy law that the U.S. Signed into law, Ronald Reagan signed a law in 1988 called the Video Privacy Protection Act. And it bans video store clerks from disclosing your VHS cassette rentals to the newspapers.
Right.
And so every other form of consumer privacy invasion is legal. It's never been banned. And so these apps, before they offer a shift to a nurse, I'm sorry, my dumb automatic camera keeps trying to keep me in frame, and it keeps, every time I sit up higher, it goes down. So I'm just going to manually alter it there. There we go. Fucking AI. So before these nurses are offered a shift, the platform can go to a data broker, totally unregulated Wild West privacy invading sector, and find out how much credit card debt the nurse has. And the more indebted the nurse is, the lower the wage they're offered, right? Because you've got bills to pay, right? Now, obviously, this is like bad for us as patients, right? No one wants their catheter inserted by someone who had to drive Uber till midnight the night before and like skip breakfast to make rent. But, this is also not a sophisticated trick.
Right.
You could imagine coal bosses doing this in the 19th
For
century.
sure.
The thing was, you would have to have like multiple barns full of guys in green eye shades to like pull that trick off, to like alter the ledgers with their quill pens, right? It's just not practical. So a lot of what makes enshitification intrinsically digital, because obviously other sectors have gotten bad because they don't have competition and they've had regulatory capture. But what makes it intrinsically digital is this ability to play the cup and balls game, but at a speed that no human eye can follow, and one of the things that I think is quite urgent about enshitification as a way of framing our understanding of the world is that more of the world is becoming digital, right? Nurses are not working in the tech industry. They just have hiring apps and they're conscripted into the tech industry. And there are a lot of sectors like this, right? Galen Weston a couple of years ago got caught doing this like Les Mis LARP where he was conspiring to raise the price of bread, right? And apparently not having seen the end of that musical where I think there's a guillotine. But he's doing this stuff, and it's difficult. Because like if you want to raise the price of bread over and over again or on like a per user basis, you need an army of kids with roller skates and pricing guns in every law, right? But like in Norway, they've rolled out these networked e-ink shelf tags for grocers, and they change the prices 3,000 times a day.
Wow.
I've been reading this wonderful book by Bill McKibben, the great environmental activist, called Here Comes the Sun. And it's about the incredible strides being made in solar. And it really is remarkable. But of course, the only way that solar works is if it's hooked up to a networked inverter. And your EV, your electric car, which is super efficient, far more reliable. It's got hundreds of moving parts instead of literally tens of thousands of moving parts. It needs a lot less service and so on. Those things are all connected to the internet. And, Tesla is like kind of one of the great pioneers of enshitification. So like there's Tesla models where if you want to unlock the battery so that you can use the whole charge, you have to pay a monthly subscription fee. And under normal circumstances, you can only use half your battery. And then it says, sorry, I'm not going any further. I do have half a charge. I'm just not going anywhere.
Wow. That's terrible. It makes me think of a short story you wrote a long time ago where toasters were involved.
Yeah, unauthorized bread. Yeah, that's coming out as a graphic novel next year as well.
Oh, cool,
And there's
cool.
some filmmakers in Toronto who have the film rights as well. But yeah, this ability to like reach into the device and change it on a per user basis. I call it sometimes like the Darth Vader MBA. You know, I am altering the arrangement. Pray I don't alter it further. And you can see how it sits at this juncture of a lack of competition. The reason we're all buying these crummy inkjet printers that are, you know, really enshitified, like inkjet ink is $10,000 a gallon. It's the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian without a special government
Wow.
permit. It would be cheaper to print your grocery list with the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. But the reason we're buying them is there's like 4 giant companies that have cornered the market.
Right.
And then the reason we don't install third-party ink mods that let us just use anyone's ink instead of HP ink is because IP law has made it illegal.
Right.
And the reason they can change the deal after they sell it to us, and like, so for example, HP routinely ships out things that they call security updates. You do want to keep your security updates up to date because like your printer is like a staging ground for attacking other devices on your network, even if you're not worried about printing confidential things, although maybe you're printing, you know, your resume or credit card form or something that is confidential as well. So you do want your printer to be up to date, but they often sneak in things that are like, have all the fingerprints of all the third party ink. And so you update your printer and then instead of being updated, it's downgraded and it doesn't work with the ink that's in it anymore.
Yeah.
It's upgraded for them. It's downgraded for you. And that's because we don't have effective consumer protection laws. And then, you know, like you put all this stuff together and you can see how like it's sitting at this juncture, right? And the reason, you know, Google was made worse is that their workforce is now afraid of their bosses. It used to be the bosses were afraid of the workers. You know, and there was this antitrust case against Google last year that Google lost. The U.S. government sued them. And in the memos published from that case, right? So these are the memos pulled out in discovery. You find out that in 2019, Google had reached a kind of flat line in its search growth because it had 90% of the market. Right? You can't really grow after that. Like you could like breed a billion humans to maturity and make them Google search users, which they call Google Classroom. But that takes a while, right? So you see this like fight between these two executives. There's a guy called Prabhagar Raghavan. He's an ex-McKinsey guy. He had overseen search at Yahoo from 90% market share to 0. And then they put him in charge of Google search revenue. And his plan was that he was going to make search worse. So he's going to take out all the auto-correcting stuff like spell checking and doing some automatic context matching and sometimes searching for synonyms. So if you search for like trousers, it might also search for pants. You take all that out, so you would have to search maybe twice or 3 times to find information that you used to get just once. And then every one of those is a chance to see the ads. Now, his adversary was a guy called Ben Gomes, who was like a really OG Googler. He had been there since Google was one server under a desk, and he had built out all the server infrastructure, that all those data centers all around the world. That was his project. He was in charge of search technology. Raghavan was search revenue. He was search technology. And he was like, over my dead body. That's a terrible idea. And he lost the argument. And he lost the argument because like they were like, oh yeah, I guess you could quit. Right? Like, what do we need you for? Right? We've got lots of technologists who will take your job. Yeah. You know, the sector's shed 500,000 jobs in the US in the last 3 years. And so we're just not as afraid of you. And of course, you're not in a union. So if we chicane you for mouthing off to your boss and saying, I don't want to break things for the users who depend on Google, then what are you going to do? You know? And so that's the Enshitification story, right? It's a bunch of historic forces. It's not like, especially I want to say, it's not failure of consumers to shop correctly. Right. It's not because like, you know, you decided you were too cheap to pay for a search engine. So you got the free search engine and then they enshitified it. They were making lots of money off the free search engine. They just decided they would make more because you couldn't leave. And if we changed the policy so that you could leave, so they weren't too big to fail, too big to jail, and too big to care, then you'd still have a free search engine. They would still be making lots of money, but it wouldn't suck.
One of the things when you're talking about like the way they twiddle the knobs and whatnot and adjust things for the nurses, like in the book, you talk about Uber, and I did ride share for a while,
Mm-hmm. You
and
drove or used?
I was a driver. Yeah,
Driving. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I did not realize that they lowered the value of the rides if you accepted more rides. I knew they
Yeah.
punished you if you didn't accept enough.
Yes. Yeah, so the drivers all know that, right? What they don't know is that or what they don't know is that the lower your standards are, right? The more desperation you demonstrate for
Yeah.
the app, the lower the wage offer per ride is based on, mileage and time. And that's just it's just like a variation on what's going on with nurses. The scholar who studies this the most is called Veena Dubel. And she calls this algorithmic wage discrimination. And
Okay.
just today, as we record this, I found a paper that was published this week that cites her work by a trade union group in the European Union called Resisting Algorithmic Management,
Oh.
laying out a program for trade unions to have a multi-pronged approach to algorithmic management. So on the one hand, to use new regulation in the EU to demand to see the data that the platforms are using to decide which work you get and how much you're getting paid and whether you're getting hired, but also to alter the apps, right? To make counter apps. There's a great scholar, Rita Quadri, who studies how gig riders in Indonesia are hiring programmers to make different apps that patch the way that their bosses' apps work.
Oh
And
yeah.
it started because they had these clubhouses. So all the gig economy in Indonesia, it's all motorbikes, right? It's not cars.
Okay.
And so they had these like clubhouses where you could stop and pee and have a cup of tea and like work on your bike and whatever. And they were co-ops. And they noticed that there were lots of things about the apps that were just like suboptimal that no one at the shop cared about. Your boss didn't care about. In fact, one of the things this trade union paper makes the point of is there's no way to talk to HR. HR is just like it's a
Yeah.
chat bot, right?
Yeah.
It's an info at email address that just goes to a giant garbage can. And so the first of these apps, they're called Tuyul apps, Tuyul. It's an Indonesian word that means mischievous spirit.
Ah.
The first Tuyul app just made the type bigger for older riders.
Oh.
Who couldn't read their screens, right? Because you're like in traffic squinting at your screen. This is bad, right?
Yeah.
But they started to get really sophisticated. So like there's apps that allow you to spoof your location. And the reason for that is that the dispatcher app won't give you a taxi pickup from a train station unless you're in front of the station when the train comes in. But that is like a lethal nightmare. There's like a million vehicles when the train comes in. So if you spoof your GPS, you can park around the corner. Right.
Right.
And then when you get a ride, you just zip around and pick the person up, but you're not contributing to the traffic and you're not risking your life. And they've just had this whole like kind of suite of these mods. And I've alluded to this a couple of times in this talk. One of the things that stops people from doing that elsewhere is that there are laws.
Right.
They're a kind of IP law called an anti-circumvention law that bans this. And in Canada, we got that law on the fourth try. So the U.S. Trade Representative had been really pressuring Canada to bring this law in. And once under the Liberals and twice under Stephen Harper's Tories, Canada rejected it. Just people hated this idea. In fact,
Of
the Liberal
course.
who was pushing it, this MP from Parkdale, from my old neighborhood in Toronto, Sam Balte, actually lost her seat to Peggy Nash. It flipped Liberal to NDP because
Right.
that was her signature achievement. And people were so angry at
Wow.
her, at this terrible thing she was trying to do. So when Harper finally decided that he was going to make it happen, he tapped two ministers, Tony Clement, noted sex pest, and James Moore, who's now a white shoe lawyer in BC, who was the heritage minister. Clement had the industry file, and he said, "Get this over the line." And so they're like, "Okay, well, maybe if we consult with Canadians, they won't be as angry. Like we'll still do it, right? But they'll feel like they've been heard." And we can show like that it's not as like the opposition isn't as widespread. So they did this consultation in 2010. Over 6,000 respondents said this is terrible and Canada shouldn't do it. They had 53 responses in favor of it, right? Like barely registered, right? And they were from like lobby groups, right? And executives at
Wow.
major corporations, right? Like the public didn't want this. So they crammed it through anyway. James Moore gave a speech at the International Chamber of Commerce meeting in Toronto, where he said the people who object to this proposal are, quote, babyish radical extremists. And so he didn't have to listen to them. So
the vast majority of Canadians are
babyish radical extremists. So they get it over the line in 2012. They have like a 3-line whip. So, you'd be like kicked out of the caucus if you didn't vote for it, and they get it into law. And the reason Harper was so anxious to have this happen was that the U.S. had threatened Canada with tariffs if we didn't pass it. So here we are, right? We're at this moment where Canada has tariffs. And like the only thing both JT and Carney could come up with is retaliatory tariffs, which is very weird, right? Because like, as every Canadian knows, our industrial policy for like 40 years has been, let's be a branch plant for Americans. We will like export raw goods to the US and re-import finished goods from it. And as a result, like everything we buy that is a finished product more or less comes from America. So we're like, let's pay 25% extra for those. This is a very weird way to punish Americans, right? It's like punching yourself in the face really hard and hoping the downstairs neighbor says, ouch. Right. But what if we were to take this like monumentally unpopular law that was rammed through in the most illegitimate way possible and crumple it up and throw it out and say to Canadian technologists, investors, cooperatives, small businesses, and tinkerers, it's open season, right? Like, sure, like you could like refill toner cartridges, but that's pretty small potatoes. You could make the support system for toner cartridge refillers, right? Like buy every printer, get every firmware update, keep the jailbreaks up to date. And like everyone who's got like a folding card table at a dry cleaner that will jailbreak your printer and let you use third-party ink with it pays you $25 a month for support, right? And now like this is like a business like Research in Motion had, right? Where everyone in the world is suddenly sending money to Canada, including Americans, because, they're the first victims of this scam. Don't just like be frustrated and angry with Elon Musk for throwing Nazi salutes. He likes the attention. Make it legal to jailbreak Teslas. So all the software upgrades come for one price at your local mechanic who keeps the money and doesn't send it to Elon Musk. And then you're like really kicking him in the dongle and hurting a share price. Do it with app stores. So every Canadian performer, news outlet, software vendor, games company that sells on iOS, Android, PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, 30% of the money they bring in makes a round trip through Silicon Valley and gets pocketed by a tech platform for processing the payment. Right now, like what is the cost of processing a payment in Canada? It's zero. Right. We have direct bank to bank transfers. So like if you're the Toronto Star and your subscribers are having 30% of their revenues creamed off and stolen by an American tech company, and we made it legal to jailbreak, it'd be like overnight getting like an extra 25% lift in your subscriber base. Right. So like Canada had this thing where it's like, we're going to tax putting links to the news on platforms. And so this is how Facebook like dropped their things. It's not bad for the news to have links to the news, right? News you're not allowed to find or talk about is a secret. Right? Like the thing that tech platforms steal from the news is not links. It's money. Right? Just make them stop stealing the money. Right? let them put the links in. Just stop stealing the money. And so, like this would be an amazing piece of industrial policy for Canada. And it would also be a way to generate a consumer surplus for Canada. So Canadians would pay less. Canadian industry would have an export product. And of course, if it's not us, it's going to be someone. Because this is the same scam Donald Trump did to everyone. And as you know, he's charging everyone tariffs. He's charging uninhabited islands with just penguins on them tariffs. Right? So like, let's get some like ex-University of Waterloo CS grads on this with some Research in Motion alum money to do this before the penguins beat us to it. And they get that industrial surplus, that industrial policy and that consumer surplus. It's a huge opportunity. It would go a long way to disenchitifying things. And remember, like the most profitable lines of business of the most profitable companies in the U.S. are all of this enshitificatory rent seeking. Right. And those companies are the only reason the U.S. stock exchange is in the black, right? The U.S. stock market would be in the red except for about a half dozen tech stocks. So really just go after those, right? With both barrels. That's the opportunity Canada has right now, not retaliatory tariffs. Not like, oh, we're not going to drink bourbon anymore. Like, that is the most weak sauce response to tariffs I've ever heard, especially since, there is some nice Canadian rye, but most of it, you know?
I'm just a beer guy anyways.
Sure. Well, Canadian beer clearly better than Canadian rye, but Canadian beer are also all owned by Coors and AB InBev.
Yes,
so
that's
there
right.
is that.
Yeah. I generally drink Bud, so that's an American company there.
It sure is.
But yeah, no, it's wild the way that like governments have folded for these kind of like monopolistic kind of like ideas that clearly, I mean, once the companies have control over the market, they just do whatever they want and don't care about the effect on users, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like as a socialist, I find it very weird that I have to explain how capitalism works to capitalists. Adam Smith, noted Trotskyist Adam Smith, he's got this famous quote where it's like, it is not from the generosity that the baker gives us our daily bread. It is from his own self-regard. That it is because the baker is afraid that a different baker will sell us better bread more cheaply, and that the baker won't have the profits, that the baker makes their bread as cheaply as possible, makes it as good as possible, that the baker cares about what we want, right? And, the fact that governments at all branches, right, regulatory, judicial, and legislative, have lost sight of this. I mentioned Google lost this antitrust case in last year. And in an antitrust case, like with any other trial, there's two phases. There's like the trial and the sentencing. They call it in antitrust, it's called the remedy phase, right, where they tell you what you have to do now that you've lost the trial. And the judge decided they didn't have to do anything because he was like, well, sure, they've been bribing Apple. So one of the things in this case is that Google gives Apple over $20 billion every year as a bribe not to make a search engine so that they don't have a competitor.
Right.
And he's like, well, if they stop bribing Apple might not be able to afford to make cool new iPhone features. And so I don't want to hurt iPhone users. I don't want to punish iPhone users by depriving them of cool features. So I'll just let them do it. Right. So the failure of the soi-disant defenders of capitalism to understand what capitalists say capitalism does and how they say it works is itself pretty remarkable. It's one of the reasons that I actually think there's some hope for this, because a lot of this stuff is very harmful to capitalists. Right? It's not like Torstar is owned by hippies, right? And yet, like, they're seeing a third of their subscriber dollars collected through apps disappear into Cupertino. And, not just that, but their ads too. So historically, in the ad world, you have advertisers, you have publishers. That's the main players, right? And then everyone in between is what's called an intermediary. So this would be like the people who like place ads and the ad agencies and like the people who do ad strategy and whatever. They accounted for 15% of the ad market, right? So 85% of the money was being split between advertisers and publishers. 15% was going to intermediaries. Now it's 51%.
Oh,
right. And advertising is dominated by two companies, by Meta and Google. Right. Wow. And the way online advertising works, you have a demand side platform that's advertisers. It's like, I would like to advertise to 18 to 34-year-old man children in the Greater Toronto area who own an Xbox and have been searching recently for information about gonorrhea. Right. And then you have the supply side platform. That's the publishers. Right. And they're like, I have a young man who meets your description. How much will you pay to get him? And then you have the marketplace where they meet. And so that's like the ad tech stack, right? It's just three pieces. So Google and Meta each operate all three parts of the ad tech stack. So Google will represent the seller, the buyer, and owns the marketplace.
Wow.
Plus, they buy and sell ads. So they compete with them as well. So this is like, say you and your partner were getting a divorce and you went to court and it turned out the same lawyer was representing both of you. And then as you were discovering this, the lawyer put on a judge's robe and got up, and it turned out they were also the judge. And then they called you up for a bench conference and you looked over and it turned out they were trying to match with both of you on Tinder. And then the trial ended and the judge brought the gavel down and said, I've decided who gets the house. It's me. Right? And so like Google lost another antitrust case over this last year. And now we're in the remedy phase of that one. It started this week. And so
Okay.
now we're going to find out whether this judge is going to say, no, it's fine. But there's a lot of advertisers and publishers who are really angry about this,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
And Google lost a third antitrust case last year. They had like I don't know what you call a hat trick where you lose 3 times, but it's whatever that's called.
Yeah, the opposite.
They're a thrice convicted monopolist. So they lost a third one last year, but that one wasn't brought by the US government. It was brought by a private company called Epic Games. Epic
Oh, yeah.
Games make Fortnite, right?
Yeah.
Fortnite, 30 cents out of every dollar you spend on a skin is stolen by Apple and Google. So they sued. So this is like billionaire on trillionaire violence.
Wow.
This is great, right? We are seeing like, and I have leftist friends who are like, why do you talk about this competition stuff? Why are you fetishizing competition, right? Maybe we should just turn them all into utilities or something. And I think that there are things that should be utilities. I'd be very happy to have things like all the fiber in the country run through publicly owned conduit, and for there to be public offerings for fiber in that conduit. I don't think it should be the only one. I don't want Pierre Polyev to be my ISP, or Doug Ford, or God help us all, Rob Ford to be my ISP, right? But they could own the conduit and they could lease it out to other parties. And like if you're the University of Toronto and you got a Scarborough campus and a downtown campus, you could run a piece of fiber between them through that public conduit, rather than like linking up your scientific instruments with your data center by running it all into the big data center in Toronto, or the big switching center in Toronto, which is like 151 Front Street. So you wouldn't be running everything down to the CN Tower and then back out again, right? You could do these point to point links, which are super efficient. But that's not the only reason that we should, the only consideration that we should have, right? So the thing about competition is it turns companies from a cartel into a rabble, right? When there's like 5 companies in a sector, like it's really easy for them to agree on what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like they fit around a table, right?
Yeah.
And like when there's like, look at the executive ranks of TELUS, Rogers, and Bell, right? Those people are not lifers in those companies. It's not like you start as like a linesman for Bell and now you're the CEO.
Right.
Those people have hopped between those companies. They all know each other.
Yeah.
Right. They're like godparents to each other's children. They, play on the same like, hockey, after work hockey league. They're executors of each other's estates, right? They see each other at weddings. So of course they have one common lobbying position. Yeah. And of course, because they divide up the country like the Pope dividing up the New World, so they don't have to compete head to head. That's right. They're not eroding their profits either. Yeah. So they're wildly profitable. And they can spare the money to bribe the CRTC or the Competition Bureau or whoever to do whatever the hell they want. If we force them to compete with each other, right? If there were like 100 companies in the sector, they would be at each other's throats. They would find they would have the same problem you do when you want to leave Facebook, which is that you hate Facebook, your friends hate Facebook, you love your friends, but you can't agree on what to do. Right? You can't even agree on like what board game to play this weekend, right? There's no way 200 of you are going to agree on when to leave Facebook. You give them what economists call the collective action problem. So if you want to turn the forces of capital against each other, right, to make them biddable, right, to make them less powerful than the state, so that the state can effectively regulate them, then you can't have just one company in the sector or 5 companies. And, I say this to my libertarian friends too. If you are like so like Musk-addled that you can no longer open your copy of Atlas Shrugged because the pages are stuck together and the only thing you think the government should be doing is enforcing contracts, okay. But like for the ref to boss the players around, they have to be more powerful than the players.
Yes.
So the smallest government you can have is determined by the largest corporation you're willing to tolerate. And, once you let TELUS buy every local carrier in the country, then the CRTC has to be more powerful than TELUS to enforce TELUS's contracts.
Yeah. I think too, like maybe I'm misremembering, but the anti-monopoly agency in Canada only has like 2 people working at it or something. Like it's extremely
it's bigger
small.
Now. It could use more budget. The biggest problem with that, so it's the anti-monopoly ministry in Canada. It's called the Competition Bureau.
Right.
I guess it's not a ministry; it's a bureau. So the Competition Bureau has historically been, I think, the world's weakest competition regulator. So in its entire history, it has challenged 3 mergers. but it
Right.
has only successfully challenged 0 mergers.
Yeah.
But in 2024, the Trudeau government, hardly hotbeds of anti-corporate activism, created a new law, a new act in Parliament that gave the most sweeping new powers to the Competition Bureau that I think any competition regulator in the world has. And in addition to those powers, they expanded the kinds of harms that the Competition Bureau could move to prevent. And one of them is harms to workers. So if they determine that a merger is likely to give bosses more power over their workforce, they can block the merger. So now they have statutory authorities. They are still under resourced. It's not 2 people, but they are
Yeah.
still under resourced. So that's the next step. But, it doesn't matter how much resources they have if they don't have powers, right?
It's
If they're
like,
not allowed to do anything, it doesn't matter.
that's right. It's like, it makes me think of like the like the CRA going after the taxes that are owed by corporations. Well,
Mhm.
they're so underfunded, and now Carney's underfunding them even more. Like,
Sure.
they have no power to
Yeah.
go after them.
But imagine if the billionaires didn't owe taxes in the first place, right?
Right.
That's where we were before. It wasn't just that we didn't have enough enforcers. It was that breaking the law wasn't against the law, right? Now it's against the law,
At
at
least it's against
least.
the law. Yeah.
So now we've got like a different challenge in front of us. But that's if I was, I don't know, Avi Solomon running or Avi, oh gosh, what's his last name? Naomi Klein's husband, who's
Oh, I
standing
can't
for
remember
the
now.
leader of the NDP. Avi Solomon's a friend of mine, and it's his name has just moved into my head and pushed out Avi's last name. But if you're sorry, Avi, and you're running for the leader of the NDP, one of the things I might say is I'm going to make one of our party platform planks funding the Competition Bureau so that its new regulatory powers could be used to do things. And I'm going to make a list of things that I'm going to direct the Competition Bureau to do, right? Once we give them this money, because now they have the powers.
Right. No, that's a good idea. It's, yeah, it's always because I call myself an anarchist. I identify as an anti-state person in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
but I see like the world we live in, and I'm like, okay, but so much of this needs to be dealt with on the same power level that these corporations are functioning at. Like, we can't just say like tomorrow the state is gone and corporations can do whatever they want.
Sure.
So I find that my philosophical views often are in tandem or have to deal with the pragmatism of reality.
So, first, it's Avi Lewis. Name just
Okay.
appeared in my head. Second of all, I think you make a good point, and I don't know if you're familiar with Varoufakis, Yanis Varoufakis. The guy used to be the finance minister of Greece. So Yanis calls himself a libertarian socialist, and I haven't. I mean, obviously, that sounds like a contradiction in terms, right? But I think
Just
about it,
to me, no.
and I think one way of putting it, and it's a way that I actually quite like, is that you should. So being in a society means coordinating your activity with other people.
Right.
And there's a certain kind of bureaucracy that you need to make that work, right?
Right.
And actually, there's a right-wing economist who I quite like, a guy called Ronald Coase. He was part of the Chicago School, so he should be my sworn enemy.
Yeah, no
But
kidding.
Coase had this incredible insight. He actually won the Nobel Prize for it. Although I should point out the Econ Nobel Prize isn't a Nobel Prize.
Not a real.
Economists
Yeah.
were like really embarrassed that no one took them seriously, so they got someone called Nobel to give out a prize to them. But Coase wrote this paper called The Theory of the Firm, and he asked, like, why do we have organizations, right? Like, why do we have churches and the mafia and governments and corporations and cycling clubs? And it's because these things lower the transaction costs of doing stuff together.
Right.
And it's just like really hard to get a D&D game together unless you've got like a place to go.
Yep.
And like, there's a table there and there's lights and so on. And eventually it's like, if you're trying to like sort that out every week where each person, like, you bring the table this week, I'll bring the generator, I'll bring the easy up. So we'll have something in case it starts raining. If you've got an institution, right, you can just move some of that stuff out. And so an institution always involves setting aside your immediate wants and needs to take account of other people's wants and needs so that you guys can do things together. And I think we should have exactly as much of that as we need and not one bit more. Right?
Yeah.
And
That's right.
I think it's always dangerous to say, okay, well, in this moment, you're going to have to take orders because it's an emergency, because it invites the permanent state of emergency, right?
Right. But
But
that's why you got to be vigilant, right?
sure, and sometimes there's an emergency, right? Like
Sometimes there's yeah,
sometimes the world's on fire.
yeah,
Sometimes there's fascists at the door, right?
yeah,
Uh, um, sometimes things are really, really bad. They're really bad here.
yeah,
And so sometimes you've just got to shut up and do what other people say, but you have to make sure that there's a way to make them stop pushing you around once the emergency is over, and
yeah.
that they don't have the power to make a new emergency. This is a little detour, but do you know David Graeber? You're an anarchist. You must know
Yep.
David Graeber. Yeah. Did you read his book, Rise of Everything, Dawn of Everything, with
Yes.
David
Yep.
Wengrow's last book?
I read roughly 80% of it.
Good book. So the stuff about the indigenous critique in the first third, about how the Enlightenment started with indigenous philosophers in the Northeast and in what would now be the Maritimes and French Canada and the Northeast of the United States. One of the points that he makes is that the reason philosophers and rhetoricians were so skilled in the northeastern forest people of the First Nations is that they had no coercive power. And so the only way the war chief could convince people to fight is by arguing them into it.
Yeah.
But then once there was a war, then you were expected to take orders.
Right.
And if you Graeber's next book, right, the Pirate Enlightenment, which is about his work in Madagascar, his PhD was ethnographies of these people in Madagascar who are descended from anarchist pirates and matriarchal warrior women who married on the island of Madagascar and still have this like distinct ethnic group. He talks, pirates were like, Paxta, Stan Rogers, and Barrett's Privateer, rather. They were anarchist ex-Navy conscripts, and the captain was elected. And the only time the captain was allowed to boss you around was during a battle. And the rest of the time, the captain was just like a crewman. Right. And so, you could
there's ways of doing things.
The subordination of the will as is needed by the circumstances, but no more subordination of your will than is demanded. And one of our goals as a civilization is to maximize the ability of people to make choices for how they want to live their lives and minimize the number of times where we have to take orders from other people.
Yep, for sure. I like that quite a bit. I mean, obviously, I take a lot of notes from various indigenous groups and the way that they've lived, and I mean the Zapatistas and democratic confederalism in Rojava, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I guess
one of the people often ask me, like, if we disenshitified technology, what would it look like? And I say it would look like a world where you got to decide how you used your technology. I don't know how you want to use your technology. Right? There's this thing that nerds sometimes say that it drives me crazy. This is so easy, my mom can use it. And the thing is that nobody is afraid of what moms will do if they don't like how the technology works. They're really afraid of how bosses will act if they don't like how the technology works. So you should say so easy your boss can use it.
Right.
Because the boss gets to call the IT department and say shut up, Poindexter. I need to download that PowerPoint presentation. And as soon as that kid has finished playing Tetris on the shared computer in the lobby of this Comfort Inn, I am logging in to get it, firewall or no firewall. Whereas if it doesn't work for your mom just has to figure it out. Your mom's got to be like a technology ninja to make the technology work. Your boss gets everything handed to them on a silver platter. Yeah. I want the internet where we all get to use the internet like a boss, right? Where it does the stuff that we need when we need it to do it. That it's we have the final say. Maybe we'll choose unwisely. And I do favor a legal regime that punishes people who invade our privacy or who harm us in other ways using our digital tools.
Yeah.
I just don't want the corporations to be in charge of that. Apple put in a little tick box that would block Facebook spying on iOS on their phones and tablets. 96% of iOS users tick the box, right? The other 4% were either drunk or Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees, which I always say would make sense because if I worked for Facebook, I'd be drunk all the time. But at the same time as Apple turned on this block for Facebook spying, they also turned on Apple spying. Apple gathers the same data Facebook used to gather, and they use it to target ads to you because they have an ad network,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I just don't want the final say about how your rights are defended to sit with companies that have every incentive to violate your rights.
Yeah. I always think of it like, because I think of it in the same way as I think of AI right now, is like there could be good ways to have these things work, but
Mm-hmm.
when profit and power is the ones that are in control of it, they legitimate, like they just refuse to do it in the most responsible and intelligent way because it doesn't profit them.
So I finished a book on September the 1st that I just turned in about AI called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to AI. And it makes an argument similar to the one that you've made. I'm actually not as skeptical about profit. I mean, I don't want profit to be the only or primary motivator in our society, but there are plenty of examples of firms that created profits that were good.
Right.
And the reason they were good is because they were afraid. And they were afraid of their workers, they were afraid of their customers, they were afraid of the government. And so, again, back to Adam Smith, right? It's not through their generosity, but through their self-regard that the baker brings us their bread.
Right.
And the organizing metaphor for this book about AI is this idea of centaurism, which comes from automation theory. And a centaur in automation theory is a person assisted by a machine, right? So if you on a bicycle are a centaur, right? Us on this
Right.
computer are centaurs. And a reverse centaur is a person who is conscripted to serve as a peripheral to the machine. So I don't know if you know, there's like an old I Love Lucy sketch, very famous, where she's working in the chocolate factory and the assembly line's going by with the chocolates on
Yep.
it. She has to put them in the box. She's the hands of the assembly line,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just the only reason she's there is that the robot can't put the chocolates in the box. And the speed goes up and up and up until she can't pick up the chocolates fast enough. She is ruined. This is why Amazon warehouse workers, as I said, are injured at 3 times the rate of other warehouse workers, is they're reverse centaurs. The pace of work is determined by these machines, AI-enabled cameras and
Mm-hmm.
things that bring stuff to them, quota-setting machines, and so on. And like some of the automation in an Amazon warehouse is pretty cool. Right, like there's like
Sure.
they experimented with these haptic bracelets that if you had a box of stuff and you were trying to find the thing that you needed to pick and put in the box for the customer, it would buzz when you got near it, and it would buzz
Oh,
harder and harder when you got near it. So like it's
sure.
kind of like a little wayfinding. Super cool. I wish
Yeah.
I had that for home when I was looking for my glasses. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
and but like it's the social arrangement. So and as I said, I'm a science fiction writer, and science fiction writers are not really concerned with what the device does. We're really concerned with who it does it to and who it does it for. It's the
Right.
most salient fact about a device. And the reality is the reason we got all this capital for AI, literally hundreds of billions of dollars, is because the market is making a bet that you can fire workers, make the remainder work faster, and turn them into AI babysitters. You can make reverse centaurs.
Yeah.
And I'm a computer scientist. A fake computer scientist. I have an honorary degree in computer science. I dropped out of the University of Waterloo, but I'm visiting computer science faculty at the Open University in the UK, and I look at some of the AI stuff, and I'm like, this is pretty cool, right? Like
Right.
from a technical perspective. But I don't
But
think anyone's funding it. No one's funding it to make workers happier.
right.
And indeed, no one's funding it to do a lot of the things that a lot of us really hate about AI. And I think this is pretty important if you want to be a materialist in your criticism of AI and you want to puncture the bubble as quickly as possible. You should really direct your focus to the things that AI does that investors are excited about. So no one is investing in AI because of deepfake porn, right?
Right.
If we ban deepfake porn tomorrow, the expected revenue from AI, right? Like the pitch deck where they say, this is how much money we're going to make if you give us $1 billion to build a data center. They wouldn't have to change the expected revenue. If you banned election disinformation, it wouldn't change,
Right.
right? There's a bunch of these applications that are spectacular in the sense of creating a spectacle. And
Right.
some of them are cultivated by the firms themselves because the spectacle is how they drum up investment capital. But it's a convincer. It's not part of their core argument. So like AI illustration. Illustrators are already the most like immiserated, precaritized workers in the arts, right? If you like zero out the wage bill of every commercial illustrator in the world, you get something like half the kombucha budget for one training run of Midjourney, right? It
Right.
just doesn't matter. right? It matters to them, it matters to me, but it doesn't matter to their like material future. And in some ways that's even more grotesque, right? Like they're just tormenting these people
that are
just
already,
a flashy demo.
yeah.
It's like when Edison was trying to prove that direct current was better than alternating current when he was fighting with Tesla. As a convincer, he electrocuted an elephant, right?
Right.
It's not like electrocuting elephants was an application for electricity, right? But he was like,
No.
I'm going to electrocute an elephant here, right? They're killing illustrators is electrocuting elephants, right? Blowing up illustrators' revenues is electrocuting elephants. But let's not kid ourselves. If we got rid of it, it wouldn't change the future of AI. Right. To change the future of AI, we need to think about its economic basis.
Yeah. Well, I've got you for over an hour already.
All right.
Where, I guess, can people find the book, and where can people find you?
Okay. Well, the book is available starting October 7th, wherever books are sold. You'll be able to get it at Indigo and Amazon, but also your local bookstore. McNally Robinson is actually fulfilling my mail orders. So if you live near any of the McNallys, because there's not just McNally Robinson, there's Ben McNally in Tyrone and stuff, you can get it there. It's distributed in Canada by Raincoast, but one of the big distributors. So any big bookseller will have it. It's published by Macmillan, which is one of the big 5 publishers. The audiobook and the ebook you can get anywhere except Audible. Audible won't carry my books.
Which is explained in the book, actually.
Which is explained in the book. You can get them from me too. You don't have to, but like if you go to my own web store is craphound.com/shop, I get a little extra money. I get like an extra $1 if you buy it that way. But you can buy them anywhere. And then you can find me on tour. I leave on October the 7th. I'm going to be in, I think, 24 cities in 4 countries. I will be in Vancouver, Calgary. I'm trying to go west to east. Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal. And I will be back in Montreal next year to do the Bronfman lecture as well. So lots of Canadian dates coming up. So come and see me and say hello. And I have this thing. It's this device I bought on the internet, and it makes books non-returnable. And I'll show you how it works.
Yeah, you can only get those on the internet, though.
It's true. It's one of the modern miracles of our age.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
It was really
you, Cory.
good chat.
Thanks.